Senator Wright.
Yes, thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I rise to oppose this bill, this Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Amendment Bilateral Agreement Implementation Bill 2014. And as an Australian Green Senator from South Australia, just like my colleague, Senator Ruston, with whom I'll take issue with some of the things she said in a minute, it's absolutely my responsibility to oppose this backward step in environmental regulation. And it's not just because I owe it to my home state, a beautiful state, much of it uniquely and hauntingly arid, the most arid state on what we know is the most arid continent in the world, but a state with wonderful wildlife and stunning wild places. But I also need to oppose this bill because, unlike the reassurances that the government is giving us that they wouldn't do anything to harm the environment, I have a duty to act on what I know about the environmental threats facing our whole country in this second decade in the 21st century. I'm not prepared to put my head in the sand. Sometimes I wish I could, because it's very, very frightening to know what the scientists are telling us. It's interesting, I was a teenager in the 1970s, and it was in the 1960s and the 1970s when we started as a human species to become aware of the frightening effects that our species was having on the viability of the planet. So we had increasing understanding about the effects of pesticides in the environment. We had increasing understanding about the effects of pollution. We had increasing understanding about the effects of a burgeoning human population and the effects of our technology on the finite nature of the planet as we became more and more aware of what a fragile, self-contained planet we live on. And of course, at that time, we started to see an increase in environmental protection laws with the Environment Protection Agency in the United States and increasingly around the world, and understanding that we needed to take responsibility for what we were doing or we would end up with nothing. So it's with great alarm that I actually see that we are going so far backwards at a rate of knots at the moment. And I have to pinch myself sometimes and question, is there something I'm missing? Is it that, in fact, these days we need less protections than the protections that we were putting in place in the 1960s and the 1970s? Is it that we've sorted these problems? Is it that we actually can be complacent now about the risks to our current generation and the future generations that will be inheriting the earth from us? And of course it's not. There's a change, there's a short-sightedness. I think in some ways there's a nihilism now. There's a sense that we just need to just give in to a certain hedonism, and we can't be making those responsible decisions that we were previously making. And I'm going to cut to the chase, because absolutely nothing in this bill will protect the environment. Instead, we know it's very clear that this bill will fast-track damaging projects and leave a legacy that will be mourned by Australians in the future as they tally up the damage. The Australian Greens have long supported a strong role for the Commonwealth in protecting the Australian environment, and that's because it's in our national interest to have robust national environmental protections to fulfil our international obligations, to protect nationally significant matters, and to do what was one of the basic reasons that we ended up stepping up, having the national government step up to protect the environment, and that's to risk the development auction that happens when the states will offer the lowest common denominator of environmental protections to the highest bidders. We only have to look around Australia today to see places that would have been trashed and gone but for the willingness of Commonwealth governments to step in and take leadership on behalf of the whole community. In 1982, I was arrested in the Franklin Dam blockade, and every time I return to Strawn, I'm reminded of the beauty of the Gordon and Franklin rivers still flowing free. I'm reminded of what we could have lost, and I do not meet anyone now who says to me we should have dammed those rivers, we should have dammed the Franklin. It was only because of a Commonwealth government in 1983 that was prepared to step in and use its powers in the face of a recalcitrant, irresponsible, bloody-minded Tasmanian government that the Franklin River was saved. The Franklin River was saved because of the very environmental laws that are being trashed by this government in 2014. Our environmental laws are failing us already. There's absolutely no shying away from that fact. We've already lost valuable places and wildlife to thousands of incremental and sometimes large-scale damaging developments that have already gone ahead. Senator Ruston talked about the importance of jobs, and of course jobs are important, but it's not a jobs or environment debate, because without an environment we have no jobs. In fact, without an environment we actually have nothing, because people tend to forget that we are indeed an animal species and we rely on an environment to survive. That's the base of what we have to remember all the time when we are thinking about the laws that we make in this place. In my home state of South Australia, we faced a long and difficult battle to protect precious Kangaroo Island from offshore oil and gas exploration. Our environment laws have been less and less effective over time since the Abbott government came into power. Its streamlined processes have made it easier for oil and gas companies to get into pristine waters like those off the coast of Kangaroo Island. So although the proposal to conduct seismic testing in the area was originally deemed a control action under the EPBC Act, the government's reduction in standards for environmental approvals has given the final decision to NOPSEMA, the National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management Authority. So although the EPBC Act controlled action was on the basis of listed threatened species and communities, listed migratory species and Commonwealth marine areas, NOPSEMA has recently given Bight Petroleum approval to conduct seismic testing in the waters off Kangaroo Island. This is despite the concerns of the community and the many people on Kangaroo Island whose livelihoods are at risk by these activities. Their jobs are at risk because of these activities, and none of the economic benefits that will flow from any oil and gas exploration will actually come back to that precious community of 4,500 people off the coast from Adelaide. It is an economy and the social fabric of a tourism destination that's been called the jewel in South Australia's crown, and it will not be protected. If passed, this bill that we're debating tonight would facilitate the handover of Commonwealth powers to approve damaging projects under the EPBC Act to state and territory governments, local governments and other unspecified bodies. State governments don't have a good record when it comes to environmental protection, and South Australia is no exception. Recently, the South Australian government has approved a mine on the Yorke Peninsula. It's a mine that will be 2.4 kilometres long, 1 kilometre wide and 450 metres deep. The mountain of overburden from the digging up of that hole in the ground is equivalent to a multi-storey building. The life of the mine is 15 years. 15 years, and as a result of that mine, it will put many hectares of some of the best barley growing land in South Australia out of production forever. Forever. It's on the record. The environment assessment shows that, so don't tell me it's rot. That is a decision that this government is prepared to make because it will not have an eye on the future. South Australia has a very small amount of arable farming land, and the government is prepared to allow a 15-year mine to put that farming land out of contention. One of the issues that's been raised about that mining is that an estimated 3 million kilograms of dust will be produced annually. It's a copper, gold and ore mine that could include radioactive uranium and its decay products called radon gas and radon daughters. That's actually been acknowledged in the studies that have been done by the proponent of the mine themselves. There is a concern that the dust that is blowing from the mine will actually affect other farming land and will actually affect the residents living on the Yorke Peninsula as well. That's the sort of decision that the South Australian state government is prepared to make. And I'm also particularly alarmed by the proposal in this bill to hand over the recent federal protection for water from significant impacts by coal and coal seam gas mining, better known as the water trigger. This move is a slap in the face to all communities facing the onslaught of coal and coal seam gas mining on their land and affecting their water supplies. Giving away these newly acquired federal powers to act in the national interest to protect water, and by extension farmland, communities and the climate, is nothing but a capitulation to the big miners, the mates of the government. I've visited the southeast of South Australia, and I've spoken with wine growers, graziers, people that the National Party profess to represent, who tell me how concerned they are about their water, their precious and finite water supply there, and they want it to be protected from unconventional gas mining. They are concerned that people like the National Party, who profess to stand up to them, are deaf to their concerns when it comes to passing legislation in Parliament. Shame. This bill puts the water trigger in its sights. So I don't support this bill. I don't support this bill because I care about South Australia, but I don't support this bill because I'm a Green senator and I care about the environment of Australia and I care about future generations. The Australian Greens don't support this bill, and we will continue to be strong and resolute in our opposition. We are a voice for the environment and a voice for all those Australians who do know that we need to protect our environment and want to see that environment protected.
Oh.